Is Ethiopia facing a new civil war that could finally destroy the country? In April 2023, the Ethiopian government launched a military operation to disarm militia forces in Amhara. However, this seemingly routine action to impose order on an increasingly unstable area of the country sparked a major insurgency in the traditional heartland of the Ethiopian state. So, just how did a disarmament operation transform into one of Ethiopia's most pressing security challenges? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Kerr-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security, and statehood. While we often think of civil wars as conflicts between a group or a region and the central government, they can also arise in power struggles between different peoples and territories within a state, which the national government must then contain. In the most extreme cases, numerous different groups can fight each other in what can become an extraordinarily complex situation that can ultimately threaten the entire existence of a country. A good example is the conflict in the Ethiopian region of Amhara. Although the Amhara have traditionally played a central role in Ethiopia, over the past several decades, tensions have steadily grown between them and the central government, as well as with two of the other dominant groups in the Ethiopian state. All this has now come together in a conflict that could threaten Ethiopia's very survival. Located in the northwest of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Amhara covers approximately 155,000 square kilometres or 60,000 square miles. This makes it the country's third largest regional state after Oromia and the Somali region. In addition to an international border with Sudan to its west, it has boundaries with several other Ethiopian provinces. These include Afar to its east, Oromia to its south, Benishangul Gumuz to its southwest, and Tigray to its north. Demographically, Amhara is home to approximately 30 million people, making it the second most populous region in Ethiopia. Most of its inhabitants are ethnic Amhara, who represent the second largest ethnic group in Ethiopia after the Oromo. Speaking a Semitic language, they're predominantly Oriental Orthodox Christian, one of the oldest established Christian churches in the world. Ethiopia is one of the world's most ancient countries. Having emerged as the Kingdom of Aksum almost 2,000 years ago, our story starts with the creation of the Ethiopian Empire, also known as Abyssinia, in the late 13th century. From the start, the Amhara dominated the state. In addition to the emperor, they held many of the most crucial positions of power within the Ethiopian hierarchy. As a result, their influence eventually extended across the country. Indeed, the Amharic language and Orthodox Christianity came to be central to Ethiopian national identity. However, in 1974, the last Ethiopian emperor, Haile Selassie, was overthrown by a left-wing military coup. Although most of the officer corps were Amhara, the new communist regime, known as the Derg, reduced the traditional Amhara dominance in Ethiopian affairs. This decline in Amhara fortunes was further cemented in 1991 when the Derg was overthrown by a coalition of ethnic militias led by the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF. In an effort to address the long-standing grievances of many of the country's minorities, the new TPLF government reorganised Ethiopia as a federation along ethnic lines. In 1995, Ethiopia was divided into 9 regions. Crucially, several areas traditionally controlled by the Amhara were now incorporated into the Tigray region. This Tigrayan dominance in the new federal system, as well as the land transfer, all fed Amhara resentment towards the central government. Arguing that their historic place in Ethiopia had been undermined, many Amhara now began to abandon their traditional support for an Ethiopian national identity and instead turned to Amhara nationalism, arguing that their interests needed to be better represented within Ethiopia as a whole. This Amhara resentment continued for the next 2 decades as the Tigrayans, who were in fact the 4th largest group in Ethiopia, continued to dominate the country. However, after years of control, their power eventually weakened, especially after the country's long-standing Prime Minister, Meles Zenawi, died in 2012. In 2018, a young ethnic Oromo, Abiy Ahmed Ali, became the new Ethiopian Prime Minister. At first, this change appeared to be a positive development for the Amhara. As well as being seen as a reformer and a moderniser, the new Prime Minister worked with the country's other ethnic groups to further reduce the power of the TPLF. All this came to a head in 2020. As the COVID pandemic raged, a dispute erupted between the federal government and the TPLF over the timing of national elections. After TPLF forces attacked a federal military base in the region, Abiy Ahmed ordered the Ethiopian National Defence Forces to take control of the area, a move that ultimately sparked what would go on to become a brutal 2-year civil war. It was at this point that Amhara spotted an opportunity. Although the war was between the federal government and Tigray, Amhara forces soon joined the fight, seeing the conflict as a chance to reclaim the territories that had been given to Tigray in 1995. They seized control of the western part of the region. However, any hopes that the territory would be handed back to Amhara was short-lived. While the government finally defeated the TPLF in November 2022, the final peace agreement reached with the mediation of the African Union called for the withdrawal of non-Tigrayan forces from Tigray, including the Amhara militias from western Tigray. This perceived betrayal by the federal government fed even greater discontent amongst the Amhara. Many felt that their contributions to the war effort had been forgotten and that their historical grievances were again ignored. As a result, tensions now began to grow between Amhara forces and the central government. I hope you're finding this interesting. If so, please do consider giving the video a like and perhaps subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. It all really helps. Thanks so much. And now back to the video. Meanwhile, as relations deteriorated between the Amhara and the federal government, problems also deepened between the Amhara and neighbouring Oromo. At one level, this had been driven by political problems. In addition to suspicions that Abiy Ahmed was favouring his own ethnic group, distrust grew between the ruling Prosperity Party's Amhara and Oromo wings. There were also fears that the Oromo were trying to further undermine Amhara's influence in the country. For example, there was widespread anger when Oromo priests tried to break away from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which still uses Amharic as its working language. However, all this has also been underpinned by growing confrontations along the boundary between Amhara and Oromo as regional forces have fought for control of several areas. While this had been a problem before the Tigray War, matters worsened as the two sides, who'd both fought with the federal government, built up combat experience and weaponry fighting up in the north. In addition, there have also been growing clashes between Amhara forces and separatist groups in the Oromia Special Zone, an autonomous area within Amhara that was established in the 1995 territorial reorganisation. It's against this backdrop of growing Amhara-Oromo fighting that the Ethiopian government decided to clamp down on the local militias in Amhara. On the 9th of April 2023, federal forces launched an operation to disarm the local militias and bring them under national military control. However, the move quickly met with widespread protests and resistance. Lying at the centre of efforts to oppose the federal government was a group known as Fano. The group emerged as a nationalist movement in 2018 as tensions grew between the Amhara and Oromo. Following this, it played a leading role in the Amhara campaign to seize and hold Western Tigray. Crucially, however, the militia isn't a single organised group. Instead, it's better understood as a loose affiliation of different organisations. But despite lacking a unified command structure, Fano has nevertheless enjoyed considerable popular support amongst the Amhara and rapidly recruited new fighters from those members of the Amhara security forces who didn't wish to join the National Army. As a result, by the middle of 2023, Fano had captured several major towns and cities, including the historically important centres of Gondar and Lalibela. Facing a rapidly deteriorating situation, the government declared a state of emergency on the 4th of August 2023. But while the Ethiopian National Defence Forces regained control of many towns and cities, opposition to the government continued to grow. As a result, Ethiopian forces resorted to increasingly brutal tactics to fight the insurgents, including artillery bombardment and airstrikes. While the Ethiopian government has eased some of the tightest restrictions over the course of 2024, including lifting the ban on communications, efforts to find a political solution have continually failed. Although the government promised a referendum on the territorial issue in November 2023, this has yet to be held. Meanwhile, the lack of a defined Fano leadership has scuppered hopes for peace talks with the group. In the meantime, the violence continues to grow. Aid organisations working in the region have not only noted the ongoing fighting between the government and militias, which saw Fano claim control over parts of Gondar in September 2024, but have also highlighted the growing problem of armed criminal gangs exploiting the region's lawlessness. Taken together, all this contributes to a growing sense that the situation in Amhara is now spiralling out of control. But what does this complex situation mean for Ethiopia? While the current fighting is undoubtedly significant in its own right, the Amhara conflict raises a more troubling question about Ethiopia's future. Could this be the conflict that finally ignites a wider civil war that spreads more widely and leads to the country's disintegration? In one sense, there are undoubtedly good reasons to worry. The Amhara are the second largest group in the country. Any full-scale conflict in the region would inevitably have devastating consequences, not just in human terms, but also regarding the broader political impact. Can Ethiopia survive if the ethnic group that more than any other has come to symbolise Ethiopian identity is marginalised and excluded? More to the point, the complex ethnic tensions extend well beyond Amhara. Ethiopia faces a precarious balancing act. Can it maintain national unity while addressing the competing grievances of the various ethnic groups, not only the Amhara, but also the Tigrayans and the Oromo, as well as the large Somali community over in the east, which also has a history of unrest? Then again, many observers would point out that talk of Ethiopia's imminent collapse has been heard many times before. Indeed, the same arguments emerged when the Tigray conflict erupted, and yet Ethiopia has survived. In this sense, the current crisis in Amhara is part of a larger pattern of ethnic tensions that have long simmered beneath the surface of Ethiopian politics. The ethnic federalism introduced in the 1990s to address historical grievances and promote ethnic autonomy has inadvertently fueled rivalries and conflict. But while Ethiopia survives, it's easy to become too complacent. Even though Ethiopia appears remarkably resilient, things may go too far at some point. In this sense, while it may be tempting to regard the conflict in Amhara as just one of many disputes that affect Ethiopia and that there's really little reason to worry, there's nevertheless the possibility that this could be the conflict that breaks Ethiopia apart, especially given the fundamental role that the Amhara have played in Ethiopia's development. For all these reasons, dealing with the conflict in Amhara is therefore more critical than many outsiders may appreciate. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos on Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa that you might find helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.